Okay, so for our next activity, we are going to work on combining some shapes in Illustrator to make more complex shapes. So this is the shape that we are going to end up making, and we are going to do so by, like I said, combining some simple shapes to make more complex ones. Okay, so to start, we need to create a new document. So go to File, New, and the size that we're going to create is 4 by 4, so 4 inches squared. Color mode RGB. Hit Create, and there we go. There's our document. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to create a rectangle to start. So my rectangle, I want the color to be no fill, black stroke. So I'm going to click on the fill area here and just choose none for the fill. Black stroke will leave. We'll change the size of it in just 1 minute. All I'm going to do now is click and drag out a rectangle approximately like that. Yours doesn't have to be exactly the same as mine, but just get it pretty close. I'm going to increase the size of the stroke up to 4 points. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add that dome to the top. So I'm going to choose my ellipse tool, and I'm going to click and drag out an ellipse. And I want the sides of both of those shapes to line up pretty well. It doesn't need to be perfect, but get it pretty close. So something like that. Release my mouse button, and there we go. If you need to resize this, you can just click and drag out to resize it if necessary. Just FYI. Okay, so my next thing that I need to do is I need to choose my selection tool. So that's, again, the black arrow or V on your keyboard. I'm going to click and drag and select both of these objects. So right now I have my circle and my rectangle selected. I'm going to come over here and choose my shape builder tool. All I need to do now is click and drag using my mouse, and I'm just going to click and drag through all these shapes, and now they are combined together. So that's what that shape builder tool does. It combines shapes together. So that works out pretty slick. And I have a little bit of a rough edge here on the sides, but I'm not too concerned about that right now. Okay, so my next step is to create this blue shape that is essentially the same shape as the one that I just made. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this shape. So I'm going to hold down the Alt key on my keyboard, and you should see a couple of arrows. For some reason, mine's not showing up. There they are now that I clicked on it. So that black and white arrow, I see that, and now that means I'm duplicating my shape. So I'm just going to click and drag that over just a little bit. I just want to move it over. I'm going to fill that now with a different color. So I can click here in my color area, my color swatches, or I can click up here. If I click up here, it pops up with my options. I'm going to get a sort of a sky blue color. If you don't want to choose that color, you can double click right here. Picker will show up, and you can choose the exact shade or hue of your color here. So somewhere in that range is fine with me, anything like that. We want to eliminate the stroke here. We don't want a black stroke around there. So that's exactly what we need right there. I'm just going to slide it over, and we need to reduce the size of it just a little bit. So I'm going to pull up the bottom. I'm not holding the shift key right now because I don't need to constrain that. And I'll do the same thing over here on the side, and I need it about that size, give or take. The other thing I need to do is I need to reorder my layers because I need this blue shape below the other shape. So right here you can see that this blue is below the outline of that rounded rectangle, or the rectangle with the dome on the top. So to do that, I can either come over here to my layers, and layers work pretty much the same way in Illustrator as they do in Photoshop. So I could click and drag that down, or the other way to do that would be to come up here to Object and hit Arrange and then send it to the back. So we want that object in the back. If you think of your layers as a stack of papers, you're just sending that piece of paper that contains that blue shape to the bottom of the stack or the back of the stack, essentially is what that's doing. Okay, so my next step is going to be to create this eye shape. So it's kind of an eye shape. That's what we'll call it for now. I need a little bit more room on my artboard, so I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. So I'm going to hit Control minus to zoom out. Now I'm going to hit the artboard tool, and now I can just click and drag this over just to give myself a little bit more room to work. I actually could draw shapes off of my artboard over here, or over here, or over here, but I would like to keep it on the artboard for now. When I'm done, I'm going to go back and reduce the size of my artboard back down to what I started with, that 4x4. But for now, I need just a little bit of extra room. Okay, so to make that shape, that eye shape, we are going to draw a couple of ellipses, okay, or circles. So I'm just going to click and drag. I'm going to make these perfect circles by holding down the shift key. So I'll make it about like that. I can always resize my shapes when I'm done. So I'll make that about like that. I'm going to change this. I'll hit it. I'll go back to the default. So I'll go just like that. So black and white, black stroke, white fill. I'm going to do the same thing with my circle as I did with this rounded rectangle over here. I'm going to hold down the Alt key on my keyboard till I see those double arrows, click and drag that down. And the shape that I'm looking for is the one that's in the intersection between these two circles. And you can see that in the center of my artboard there. I just released both my shift key and then my mouse key. So now my shape has been created, and this is the shape that I'm looking for right here. You would be able to see everything if I turned off the fill on that. So I'll just do that here real quick. Whoops. So I'll just hit that. So now you can see that there's the shape that I'm looking for. Okay, so now we are going to select both of those again. So I use my selection tool, grab both of them, and now my shape builder tool. We're going to use this in just a little bit of a different way this time. As you can see, if I mouse over my shape right now, that I get that plus sign next to my cursor, or kind of below my cursor. If I hold down the Alt key on my keyboard, I get the minus sign. So I'm removing that area from my shape, and that's exactly what I want to do. So I'm just going to click once in that circle up there and click once in the circle down here. There is my eye shape. All I need to do now is move this into position over here on top of my other shapes and resize that. So all I'm going to do to resize it is hold down the shift key and click and drag out. And we'll do the same thing over here on that side until we get a shape that is about like that. Okay, so we want our eyeball. We want to increase the size, or sorry, not eyeball, but the actual eye shape. We're going to increase the size of the stroke to 4 points. Okay, and I actually do want that filled with white. So I am going to double click right there on my swatch for my fill color, and then I will choose white for the fill. Now what I need to do is I need to move that backwards. So now that I have it selected, I can go to Object, Arrange, and Send Backward. Okay, I'll do that once, and it didn't get far enough back, so Object, Arrange, Send Backward one more time, and there we go. That's good. That's exactly what I want. The next thing then I need to do is I need to create what would be essentially kind of the iris of my eye. So I'm going to choose my ellipse tool. I'm going to click and drag while holding the shift key so it constrains the proportions. I want that filled with black and no stroke. So I will change that to no stroke. And I'll just click up here to kind of reset, choose my selection tool, and I'll click and drag that over into the right spot. I'm going to hold down the shift key and increase the size of mine because I made mine a little small. Make it a little bit bigger and move it over just a little bit. Okay, now we are pretty good there. Now I just need to make that moon shape for the center. I made an extra eye shape, so I'm going to delete that. I'm selecting it with my selection tool, and I'm just going to hit delete on my keyboard. Okay, so now I need to make that moon shape for the center, kind of the iris or the pupil of my eye. I'm going to choose my ellipse tool, and now I'm just going to click while holding the shift key, click and drag out a circle. I'm going to copy that. So using my selection tool, holding down the Alt key, click and drag that over. I might have just made an extra copy, but that's okay. Click and drag it over, and there's my other circle overlapping again. I'm going to choose both of those shapes using my selection tool. I just want to select these two shapes and not more than that. I'm going to click off of that so you can see what I mean. So if I click and select all of these, then I have all of the objects selected. That's not what I want. For this instance, it's not really going to matter too much, but it might if you were doing something a little bit different to your shapes. But I'm going to choose my shape builder tool again. Again, I'm going to hold down the Alt key on my keyboard till I see that minus sign next to my cursor. Click there and click there. And what I'm left with is this nice moon shape. And what I need to do with that then is I'm going to first move it over into position. So I'll move it over on top of my eye. Whoops, I just hit Control T on my keyboard because I'm used to Photoshop. To resize things or free transform is Control T. I'll find myself doing that all the time. In Illustrator, you don't need to do that. It kind of automatically gets built into that selection tool. You don't ever have to hit Control T. If you do, it pops up with your text or your type tool. Okay, so right now all I need to do is I need to eliminate that stroke. So I'm going to click up here, I'll hit the no stroke, and then that should be pretty good. All right, so if you compare that to my original, we're getting pretty close. I'm pretty happy with that. Again, I have that little kind of jagged edge here where my ellipse tool met my rectangle, but for this project, I'll be happy with this. That's just fine with me. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do, and actually the last thing, will be to resize my artboard. So I'm going to click and drag that in till we hit 4 inches, and right there, that's good. Now I just need to go to File, Save As, and I'm going to save this as a PDF file, and go ahead, save it, and submit it in Classroom. All right, good luck.